The tray of surgical steel rattled against the counter, a frantic, rhythmic shivering that matched the vibration in Kalen's own teeth. He didn't look at the readout. He didn't need to see the scrolling crimson warnings to know the atmosphere was currently being shredded by something that didn't belong to the Vesper 9 outpost. Across the small, sterile room, the woman, if that word even applied to a creature with skin the color of a dying star, didn't flinch. She simply watched the door with amber eyes that seemed to perceive the molecular structure of the reinforced titanium. Kalen gripped the edge of the exam table, his knuckles white against the dark, iridescent fabric of her borrowed tunic. If the local marshal found out he was sheltering a high-priority phantom, he was... A thunderous crack of displaced air cut the thought dead. The clinic lights flickered, died, and surged back to a sickly, emergency amber. "Stay behind the line," Kalen whispered, though his voice lacked any real authority. "The line has already been crossed, Doctor," she replied. It was the first time her voice had carried that specific melodic weight. 12 hours earlier, the hardest part of Kalen's day had been a clogged, thermal-sealed coffee pouch. He remembered the specific, annoying flick of his wrist required to snap the plastic seal, the bitter smell of synthetic beans filling the cramped kitchenette. It had been a Tuesday, a quiet, rainy Tuesday, where the most dangerous thing in the valley was a technician with a minor plasma burn and a bad attitude. Then the sky turned to molten gold. Kalen had ignored protocol, which dictated waiting for a security detail that was 3 hours away, and trekked into the mud. He found the wreck half buried in the ridge, a jagged shard of obsidian pulsing with a rhythmic, dying light. Inside, the air tasted like ozone and expensive perfume. He had found Lyra Vane slumped against a console that looked less like machinery and more like a frozen explosion. When his scanner hit her, it didn't just beep, it screamed. Unknown metabolic structure, unknown neural mapping. And then there was the ichor. Cobalt, shimmering, and thick, it stained his gloves a deep, royal blue as he dragged her into the rain. Back at the clinic, the science was a nightmare. Kalen worked with a frantic precision, his mind racing to categorize a physiology that defied every textbook in the colonial archive. Her cellular regeneration wasn't just fast, it was aggressive. He watched through the digital lens as her ruptured capillaries fused back together in real time, driven by a genetic marker that flickered with a secondary, encrypted command lineage. It wasn't natural evolution. It was engineering. "You're important," Kalen had muttered while stitching a laceration that was already beginning to silver over. She hadn't answered then. She had only watched him with that unsettling, calculating stillness. Now, the silence of the clinic was gone. The heavy, rhythmic thrum of military-grade engines began to vibrate through the floorboards. Marshal Thorne wasn't just early, he was coming in heavy. Kalen felt the sticky residue of a medical adhesive strip on his thumb, a tiny, nagging annoyance he couldn't quite peel off as he watched the perimeter sweep on his monitor. "They aren't here for a medical report," Lyra said, standing up with a grace that made her earlier injuries seem like a lie. Kalen stepped between her and the door. "I know, but I'm the only one here who doesn't want to put you in a cage." The heavy, rhythmic thrum of Marshal Thorne's dropship transitioned into the sharp, metallic bark of orders being shouted over the rain. Kalen felt the sticky residue of a medical adhesive strip on his thumb, a tiny, nagging annoyance he couldn't quite peel off as he watched the perimeter sweep on his monitor. Thorne entered the clinic with the grace of a falling boulder, his uniform crisp despite the Vesper 9 mud, eyes immediately locking onto Lyra with the predatory focus of a man who smelled a promotion. "Step away from the asset, Kalen," Thorne commanded, his hand resting on the hilt of a high-frequency stun baton. "She's a patient, Marshal," Kalen replied, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Lyra didn't move, yet the air around her seemed to thicken, a localized gravity well that made the medical monitors chirp in protest. Thorne's team moved to flank her, their scanners emitting a high-pitched whine that set Kalen's teeth on edge. The lead technician's face drained of all color as the readings mirrored Kalen's own discovery. The neural architecture of a war myth, a sovereign of the onyx shards who had been missing for 3 standard weeks. Thorn's eyes widened. You're her, the ghost sovereign. Lyra's voice was like ice cracking on a deep lake. I'm many things, Marshal, but today I'm simply tired. Kalen saw the flicker of Thorn's finger toward his comms. If that signal went out, if the colonial government realized they were holding a galactic fulcrum, this outpost would become the epicenter of a system-wide firestorm. Kalen moved instinctively, placing his body between Thorn's weapon and the woman who had bled cobalt on his floor. She looks like a god, and I look like... The clinic doors hissed open again, but this time there was no sound of boots. Instead, a low-frequency hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound so deep it felt like it was originating from the planet's core. Outside, the rain stopped mid-air, caught in the tractor grip of 3 massive obsidian vessels that had just torn through the cloud layer without a single sensor warning. The onyx shards had found their queen. Kalen watched the shadows of the colossal ships pass over the clinic windows, plunging the room into a darkness that felt ancient. Thorn soldiers dropped their rifles, not out of surrender, but because their nervous systems had simply locked up under the sheer pressure of the alien presence. Lyra stepped forward, her hand brushing Kalen's shoulder as she passed, a touch that felt like a brand of fire and gratitude. "Do not follow," she whispered, her eyes glowing with a quiet, lethal authority. Kalen wanted to shout, to grab her hand, to demand she stay in this small, safe, broken world where the only danger was a bad cup of coffee. But he saw the way she carried her head, the heavy mantle of a ruler who understood that her peace was a luxury the stars couldn't afford. She walked out into the mist, her silhouette merging with the shafts of gold light descending from the lead ship. 30 days later, the Vesper, 9 rains still hummed against the metal ribs of the colony. Kalen sat by the fog window of the clinic, his fingers tracing a faint, silver scar on the glass where she had once pressed her palm. He watched the horizon, a man who knew the true scale of the dark, waiting for a golden wound to tear through the clouds once more.